Hello again everybody, back with another video. This time looking at the UK government COVID-19 data and looking at it in a scientific manner rather than what you get presented on the television. And let's see how serious this pandemic is. So firstly, my data has come from these sites, so it's a UK Gov site, and you can get testing, cases, deaths and vaccinations from it. And you can basically choose cumulative, you can look at daily, you can just pull the data up, so there's graphs, there's tables, and you can actually download the data into an Excel spreadsheet. So what I've done from this is I've created a spreadsheet with the daily cases, daily deaths, total tests, and I've calculated what the positive results per 1,000 tests are, because this is what would give you, if this was an infectious disease, this would give you the level of infection, so how many positives they get out of every 1,000 tests they undertake. And what I've done here as well is I've picked two months to compare, July 20 and March 21. And of those, I've looked at the average daily cases, the average daily tests, the average daily deaths, and the average infection rate. That's this number of positive tests per 1,000. And I'll show you why I've selected those and why I've worked these figures out. And I've also done some corrections to correct the one to the other based on the difference in testing being carried out, but we'll talk about that in more detail. And I've created various charts from this data which I will share with you now. So firstly, this is the daily positive tests. So this is the 21st of April 2020 to the 18th of March 2021. So just a few days old, but I'll always be trying to catch up with the data. I have to make a video at some point. So what we looked at here is this is the number of UK daily positive tests. They call them cases. And what I've done is I've picked the low point. So this is where it's bumping along at the lowest point. And I've picked a month of July 2020. And the average daily cases or tests, positive tests, was 645. Then we've had this second wave. So this second wave looks far worse than this first one, doesn't it? But I'll show you that it actually isn't, because there were far less tests done here. More tests, more positive results. Now, what I'm not saying that this is false positives, because I think that's a rabbit hole. This test is detecting something. Now, it could well be detecting seasonal illness. It could be detecting what's in the body during you having a chest infection, a cold, the flu, whatever you name it. But wouldn't that be convenient if the common cold was coming out as a new disease? Now, the difference there is what's being used as the standard for the PCR tests that are being carried out. If it's something that's in your body when you've got seasonal illness, it's going to test positive. But this cannot be a result of a false positive, because it would just follow the graph of tests, which I'll show you in a minute. So forget that rabbit hole about false positives. Now, these rates here, where it's disappeared, could potentially be false positives, but you wouldn't get this if it was false positives. It would just keep going up. So it's detecting something, but who knows what it's detecting? I'm sure the people testing it aren't fiddling results. But if you've got a standard coming down from above that these tests are being measured against, then people would rightly report the results, wouldn't they? But that's just a potential view of my view of what may be happening here. But let's move on anyway. So we can see we had 645 in July. And for the days we've had, well, in this case, 18 days of March, we have an average of 5796. So clearly we've got, 8 to 9 times more cases now than we had then, or do we? We'll look at the data later. So this is the deaths. So we're looking at deaths within 28 days of a positive test. That doesn't have to mean you died of the COVID. That could mean you've been hit by a bus, you've had a sudden heart attack, you've fallen down the stairs, fallen off a ladder. You could be part of this now. The one thing that's probably true is the more positive tests you have, the more likely you are to gain figures of deaths that have died within 28 days of that positive test. So doesn't mean it was a COVID, and this says this specifically on the government website. So I've put the links here, you can go and look at all this data, but these are the deaths plotted, and you can see I've taken July 2020, so we've had a little bit of coming down from the first peak, and we're bumping around here, and the average per day in July 2020 was 26 deaths. Now, if we look at March 2021, the average here was still coming down from this peak. The average is 161 deaths per day. This is 161 people per day in March, on average, dying within 28 days of a positive test. So look at these figures now. You can see, it looks far worse, doesn't it? Far worse than here. And that's what they're saying. There's more cases now, as we saw in the previous graph. There's more deaths. We have to be cautious. Now, these are the UK virus tests, and you can download it from here. So it's all government data, YouTube. So nothing I'm reporting here is false. It's all information available on the UK government website. So we have here, in July 2020, the average number of tests per day were 127,398. That's during this time, so you can see it was going up. And now if we look where we are in March, we've had this leap, this massive leap in testing. And now in March, the average number of tests is 1,110,498 per day. So you can see there's been a 9 times increase, something like that, in the number of tests during this time. Now, if we look at that data that I showed you from the spreadsheet that I'd calculated, so this is a comparison of the July 2020 data with March 2021 data normalised against daily tests. So look at July, average daily cases 645, these are positive tests. Average daily tests 127,398. Average daily deaths 26, and in March, as we saw, it went to 5796, but we had an average daily test rate of over 1 million. The average daily death of 161. The average infection rate, and I'll show you this graph in a minute. These are the number of positives per 1,000 tests. In July it was 5, and in March 21 per day on average, bear in mind it's still falling, is 6. So we are very, very similar infection rates to we were in July. But we're not getting told that, we're getting told, and this is how you should scientifically analyse data, not by just putting numbers of cases up. It has to be normalised to the testing. So let's multiply these figures that we've got for March, and let's multiply them by the test ratio. So I'm going to multiply this figure here by 1110498. Sorry, I am not. I'm going to multiply it by this figure and divide it by this figure to give us what this figure would be if we were carrying out this amount of tests, and that drops to 665. Look, virtually identical to July 2020. This will be the same because I'm converting this one to this one, but the number of deaths comes down to 19. Now I think this is fair enough, because the more positive tests you are, the more people are likely to die within 28 days of it. So it will be proportional. But these are in exactly the same ballpark, and so is the infection rate. And what is interesting, if you take the positive tests in July, look at the percent positive tests and the amount of testing done, it was 0.51. If we look in March and we calculate the similar figure, it's 0.52%. So could this be, this baseline, could this be a false positive rate? Personally, I think it could be. Now, this is the graph really that tells you what is going on here. Okay, so this is the UK daily positive tests per 1,000 virus tests carried out. And this is from the 21st of April 2020 to the 17th of March 2021. So what I've done here is I've looked at how many tests I've carried out, looked at the positive tests, and created the number of positive tests per 1,000 tests. So we can see now that where we had with the number of tests, we had a low peak for the first so-called wave. Now we don't, we have a high one. And it comes down and it's bumping around here at somewhere between, 4 and 7, something like that for July. And the average is 5. Okay, so we had on the 4th of July, we had the UK pubs open. So that happened here. Then this started to go up and the rule of 6 came in. Then we had this peak. And now, looking at, that should say, sorry, there's an error there. That should say, I've copied and pasted and got it wrong. This should say March 2021, sorry about that. We have an average of 6. But if we look where we are now, we're around 4 positives per 1,000 tests, which you could argue is an infection rate. That is actually below where we were in July when the pubs were open, way below where we had the rule of 6. So basically we are now, in terms of, forget the cases, forget the number of positive tests, look at how many tests out of all the tests are positive, we are below summer levels. But as we said, on average, is this here, does this mean that there is a virus still knocking around, or is this just false positives? Now, not only are we in a better position than we were last summer, we are still, apart from the children going to school, fully locked down in the UK. Now, how you can have a really nasty infectious disease out there and you allow millions of school children from different homes to go in and mix in a classroom, where's the logic in that? I don't think there is any. You know, if there was a really serious pandemic and there were hearses and ambulances driving up and down your road all day picking up dead bodies, you wouldn't be allowing school children out. But they're saying they've got to be a lot more cautious because we can always, as soon as we mix, it will take off again. Well, if you are measuring seasonal illness and transmittable illness, then possibly that's the case, but less likely in the summer. Now that we're kind of saying, we could have a third wave, and people are talking about it being in summer, which to me doesn't make sense. But not only are we below there, but now they have 25 million people vaccinated with their wonderful 90-95% efficacy vaccine. So not only are we below where we were last summer, we've got this wonderful vaccine in half the UK adult population, apparently. And we're still locked down. So what on earth is going on? Goalposts are moving. You are being bamboozled with figures that are being put to you by alleged scientists. But if you're doing a true scientific analysis of the data, you would do this and you would do this, which they aren't doing, which you'd imagine was good news, wouldn't you? Now let's have a look at the UK deaths. And what I've done is I've put the vaccines, and YouTube, they are slightly different because I've put them to the nearest 1,000, but they are off the UK website. So this is where we had our tier 4 England lockdown, where 75% were in tier 4. Then we went to a full lockdown, tier 5. And as we progressed, the deaths are coming down. Now, why on earth they report the deaths like this, I don't know, because I'm sure people don't drop down dead at a certain day of the week. It's just the way it's been reported, mainly so they can get higher figures probably. But take a look at this now. This rate is actually slowing down, but we're actually increasing vaccination. So is the vaccine doing anything to this? Where's the evidence? They keep telling us vaccines are doing things, but is there evidence from there? So here you wouldn't expect much because we haven't vaccinated many, but wouldn't this start to actually increase and come down to zero if this was working? Not stretch out. So if we look at UK daily positive tests, we have a similar graph, and it's virtually now flattened out. And if you look at these data, I suppose the powers that be say it's worrying because these are going up, but they're only going up because they're doing more testing. And according to this, the vaccine isn't accelerating this fall at all. We've actually started to go back up now. So if we again look at why they're going up, why the positive tests are going up, is because of what's going on here. Now, it seems to be that they're supplementing the PCR tests with lateral flow tests because the capacity is only around 700,000 for the PCR tests according to their figures, but they're now, as you can see, up to over 1.5 million tests at certain points. But on average, it was 1,110,500. Okay, so this is just showing you why those positive tests are going back up. Now, if we look at the UK daily positive tests per 1,000 virus tests, we get this graph. Now, I did make a video where it was coming down in a straight line and it should have intersected, but there's still a straight line there, but now we seem to have gone into a much shallower, but again, almost straight line. As you can see now, the infection rate, or the positive test per 1,000 tests carried out, is 4, which is below July 2020 value. But we've got all this vaccination going on, but this, to me, is not, surely there would be some visible impact on that. But what was interesting is when you look at the figures, the lockdown, that happened, we were already on the way down before that even kicked in, according to this graph. Now, just to put everything into perspective, I want to look at the NHS data again. I've made a couple of videos on this, but I have updated the data. So this is just showing you basically how I've worked out the population of England. So I've looked at the population of the United Kingdom by age, converted it into the age range reported on NHS England, put the UK population, looked at what that was as percent of total, and corrected it to England population. So the UK is 66.8 million, the UK is 56.3 million, and I've prorated that down. There may be a slight error, but it's bound to be in a pretty good ballpark. Then I've looked at the number of positive tests carried out in England, and up to March, there's another typo there, 2021, we've got 3.7 million positive tests, and you can get that from the website that I showed you earlier. And you can download from NHS England this file here, COVID-19 total announced deaths, 18th of March 2021. And here's the link if you want to go and follow that information. So there is the spreadsheet, that's the first page, and this is this tab here, death by condition. So this is the deaths with pre-existing conditions, without pre-existing conditions, and total against the age ranges. So that is the key data that I have used, and I have used that to create this spreadsheet. So this is the data table in it, and as you can see, I've put those figures into here, and then that calculates the data for the 17th up to the 17th of March with no pre-existing, with pre-existing, and total. And I've done various calculations based on that. So all the figures are fairly low, apart from people with pre-existing conditions. There are 60 to 79 and 80 plus. You can freeze that and read the data if you wish. I've also looked at lifetime risk and yearly risks of dying in a car crash. And basically for England, which is to give a reference to this, there's 56 in a million, because we've been going now with the COVID for 13 and a half months since the first case in February 2020. So 13 and a half months of this, and we're still in lockdown, never came out of it. And the lifetime risk of dying in a car crash in England is 47 people per million in 13 and a half months. So I've just done some calculations here to show if you take somebody that's aged 20 to 60, so driving a car and without pre-existing conditions, with COVID, the chances of dying in that age range are 23.1. These are dying in hospital figures, and the car crash deaths is 47. So I'll show you the graph and talk about that later. But from this, you can produce some charts. So this is the total deaths with positive tests in England, so those dying within 28 days. And the blue bars are pre-existing, without pre-existing, and the gold or orange are with pre-existing. So if we look at 0 to 19-year-olds, 9 people without pre-existing conditions have died in basically 13 and a half months of COVID. 9 people, and 30 with pre-existing. Now these are, because it's within 28 days, these could have died in a car crash, could have died falling, been killed in other ways, or sudden death. There could have been all kinds of things, but that is statistically insignificant. So is this value here. If you look at the total deaths that we can have, this is insignificant. So I'll just go back to this. The total expected deaths in England from the 1st of February 2020 to the 17th of March 2021 in 410 days is 615,000 people, with a daily death rate of 1,500 a day. That's a big number, especially when we're looking at the COVID. Now this is England data. So as we say here, coming back to this, even 40 to 60 people, 40 to 60 year olds, there's only 604 people in 13 and a half months died from COVID. It's gone up a little bit here, but these are people with life-threatening underlying health conditions. Now, where it really kicks off is the 60 to 79s and the 80 pluses, but then these figures are the people who have serious underlying health conditions. So from COVID, it's killing off sick and old people, basically. These are the people dying. So looking at this in a different way, this is the number of deaths per million of a specific age range of population. So there's less than one person who've got no underlying health conditions per million. A statistically insignificant figure have died. Even the with pre-existing is statistically very low. 20 to 39, again, very low, both for pre-existing conditions and non-pre-existing conditions. But when we get to 40 to 59, it goes up a little. This is still relatively low, but the peaks are, again, the sick people, the elderly and the sick. So if you truly wanted to protect the population and give people their full freedom back, wouldn't you just fully vaccinate the vulnerable in these age groups? If this wonderful, effective or efficacious vaccine, say it's 95% effective, this would reduce the deaths in these to 145 per million and 788 per million. So it'd take it down to here and here. Now, wouldn't you just do that and let everybody else live their life and let the crippling effects to the economy go away? Now, the UK population is 16 million. The number with serious underlying health conditions must be less than that by a long way. Let's say if it was half of that, which it probably isn't, it would be 8. If it was a quarter, it would be a 4. Let's say a quarter of them have underlying health conditions. So that would be 4 million people. Now they say they've vaccinated 25 million. Surely they have vaccinated all the vulnerable people now. Surely all these people have been picked off and are now protected. In which case, taking the figures I was talking about earlier, where the so-called infection rate, which is probably now a false positive rate, is next to 0. Why on earth are we still in lockdown, and why is this going on, and why do they want to vaccinate people, children, and teenagers? Why? And when all these people are protected, even if they got infected, they're not going to kill them now. Why? It makes no sense. It makes no scientific sense at all. And this is just showing you the percentage of pre-existing conditions and no pre-existing. So even in the 80 plus, only 3% of the total deaths are accountable by people without pre-existing conditions. 97% of these old people were already sick that died with a positive test. Even going down to the 60, 70, it becomes more as you go to these in terms of the percentage, but that's because these figures are so tiny, they're insignificant, but these are the key ones. Basically, the old and the sick are dying. And this was coming back to the car accidents. These are people in hospital. So people who are perfectly healthy, 23.1 people per million have died. In the age group of 20 to 60, car driving age, 20 to 60, 23.1 people have died within 28 days of a positive test in hospital. Now that might be 40 if we include the people who have died at home, because there are people dying at home as well as hospital, but it's still less than the chance of dying in a car crash. But we haven't banned cars, well, not yet, not until climate change lockdowns come in. And put it into another perspective, this is COVID deaths versus cancer deaths and deaths from heart disease and heart attacks. So if we look at the total COVID, we've got, this is in England, 58,712, and we have 151,000 cancer deaths and 154,000 heart attacks. So all this time, all this effort, all this expense is targeted at this, and what are they doing for these? So that's all I've got to say. So in summary, we are being presented with numbers of cases. We are being told that it's much higher than it was last summer. We need to be cautious coming out, else there'll be another wave. When in fact, when you look at the percentage of positive tests per test, or the number of tests per 1,000 that are positive, we're actually at the lowest we were at during the whole of July last year. we've vaccinated loads of people, and we're still in lockdown for a disease that really is pretty insignificant when you look at the death rates that I've just shown you. So that's all I've got to say. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.